Many thanks to Paul, but I'm going to speak quite fast. I've got a lot to get through. Thanks very much to Paul. It's been lovely coming here. I've got degrees from London, Durham, and Newcastle. I've taught with the Open University, Newcastle University, Cambridge, and the University of Teesside. Um, I discovered my long-term research is on philosophy in Cambridge, and there was one Knightsbridge professor that I decided to work on because no one else had. And when I started searching for papers, they ended up with Lady Rothschild. And I ended up having a room in her house for 3 years. And that was absolutely wonderful because the cook used to bring me coffee. Every Friday we had a dinner with people like Isaiah Berlin and Noel Allen, starting with Bloody Marys. So I was only just about competent to speak by the time we got to the after dinner conversations. My daughter's studying archaeology in Cambridge now, and I'm interested really in who we are and what we know. And I answer those in reference to who and what we have been and known. So that's where the history thing comes out. Um, this philosopher that I'm working on once complained that too many philosophers studied logic, formal logic or inductive logic. And he said, what we should really be studying is real logic. That is the way people actually think, rather than formal constructions of how they do it. Um, Really, we've forgotten here over 400 years of our natural history that we were once part of one of the greatest empires in history. And we can learn from the study of that. In particular, my namesake, Edward Gibbons' multi-volume book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. By the way, I couldn't carry all the books on the Roman Empire, but you want to try this one, Britain after Rome, because what's astonishing is just what happened when the Romans left. You remember that Monty Python sketch where the Palestine Liberation Front were complaining about the Romans, and at the end of it, the point was, well, what's left? What would there have been if the Romans hadn't been there, and what's left after the Romans left us? So there's interesting sub-questions. What happens when an empire collapses? And you might think about the British Empire collapsing as well. And how should we behave as a nation when things are in decline? Bit of bad news, though. I'm going to really big up the Romans. But the bad news is Rome was a patriarchy. Women were treated really badly. Slavery was a dominant model, although by the 3rd century it was waning, and after the 4th century it was actually banned in the empire. There was a class hierarchy, patricians at the top, equestrians, that's the middle classes, people like us, the plebs, and slaves. Early republican virtue, meaning moral ways of living, and greatness ended really with the populist authoritarianism that came with Julius Caesar and the Caesars afterwards. So much of what I'm going to talk about really goes back to the Republican Romans. Just think about the wealthy Crassus and the way he funded Caesar's campaigns to basically overthrow democracy. And think about Donald Trump, and think about Musk and all those billionaires in America who are funding the undermining of the American democratic constitution right before our eyes. There was always rebellions going on, often at the borders, and this area was really fractious. There was a tribe called the Briganti who had converted to the Roman way of life, but they would regularly rebel, and that's why people like Constantine and his father Constantius, that's why Hadrian, and that's why Septimius Severus came here. They didn't came here to sort of do a tour of York. They came up here to establish Roman authority north of here. And of course, you've all got to go to Aldborough just up the road, because underground in Aldborough is a whole town almost a city. I've spoken to them and I've visited them often. They haven't got the money to dig it up. But when they start digging, when they've got the money, if they ever get the money, it's going to be like a mini Pompeii. Right, Castle Howard. I don't know whether you've been there. If you haven't, you should go. But when you walk in the main door, something that's really interesting. If you look to the right, go in the door, there's a column. That column is an altar from Delphi. I don't know how many of you have been to Delphi, but it's an awe-inspiring place to go. That's an altar. But the top of the stairs, there is a statue of Fortuna, a woman sitting with these objects in her hand. Almost every statue of Fortuna was broken up once Christianity became the dominant religion because it was considered pagan. This one survived, buried somewhere. But Fortuna was a Roman goddess who basically countered the idea that reason, which the Stoics were putting forward as the dominant force in the world, and she was saying, but there's just Fortune. Fortune is a woman who actually smiles brightly on the young men, the brave, and those who are ingenious, and doesn't like old men who don't really have what's needed. So, um, oh, sorry. Right, go and see that. There's lots of books. I won't go through them all, but just two at the bottom you might want to look at. The Paul Crystal book, A Historical Guide to Rome and York, is worth going at. But also, there's a map now, a historical map of Roman Britain. So it's an Ordnance Survey map, and it covers all the Roman sites and roads. I suggest you go and buy one because it's fabulously interesting. I'll get which way it is now. Right. Just in case I don't get to the end, and because my favorite mantra to students and to lecturers, I had to teach all these supervisors at Newcastle for 4 years. Can you imagine trying to teach supervisors how to supervise? But it was part of my duty. But I used to say what you're going to say it, and then say you've said it. So this is what I'm going to say. The most important thing for me is to ask, why was the Roman Empire so successful? I'm begging the question. It was successful, but this empire starts about 400 years before Christ. It lasts in the West until the 5th century, but then, thanks to Constantine, the empire moves to the east to what's now Constantinople, and that survives till 1467. No other empire we know has survived that long in different formations. Why? And I'm going to give lots of reasons, possibly why, but the one I want to give you is that they invented a new way of organizing people, especially masses of people over masses of geographical identities. How do you unite North Africans, Gauls, Hispanians, Arabs? How do you get them all to work together? And they invented something called the cosmopolis, a polis of all people, of all policies. The Greeks invented a system of rule, Athens, Sparta, a polis, but they were too small. That's why Greece in the end collapses, because the polis was too small a political unit. The Romans learned from that and they invented the cosmopolis. When they conquered a country, they'd bashed the barbarians. They invented a new system called pet the provincial. It's almost like pet a hoodie or hug a hoodie. The idea was you make them friends and then you make them into Romans. Septimius Severus was a black Arab North African, and he became emperor of the Roman Empire. Doesn't matter what your background was, what your religion was, what your color was, what your creed was, what your family was. You could become a Roman. And if you were a Roman, you could rise through the ranks and the classes I'm going too slowly. But in the end, they invented this system where, secondly, inclusion and tolerance trumps exclusion and repression. Every other empire I know of in the world, the Spanish, the Germans, the Belgians, the Portuguese, when they took over a country, they repressed everyone there and kept them repressed. And they exploited the resources and took them back to where they were going. The British, I know this because my subject is 19th century Britain. And when you read Gladstone and you read all the great writers about diplomacy and politics, they were all immersed in the classics and they were all immersed in Greek and Roman history. And what they learned from the Romans was that you had to adopt a cosmopolitan system. Instead of repressing the Maori, you invite them to become part of a commonwealth that they could share in. So instead of bash a barbarian, you pet a provincial. They then love you, they care for you, and they join in your society, and you don't have to spend all your time fighting them and killing them and worrying about whether you were going to get robbed or murdered. So that worked really well. So that's basically my thesis. Update on Roman Yorkshire. Loads of things have been discovered. We've got a vicus or small town near Moulton in the Wolds. There's other developments being discovered near Warhamless Street, an extensive villa complex at Bedlam. A road has been discovered running alongside the manor house at Skelton near York, going through to Aldborough. A Roman road running from Ilkley to Aldborough. Several way stations have been discovered in the last few years at Catterick and York, and also Dishforth, Barton and Piercebridge. The main reason why the A1 has taken so long to modernise is because every mile they found a way station. It's like a motorway service station. And of course, the archaeologists said, you can't build it. We've got to do some research. This has been a researcher's paradise. So there's, from Manchester to York, there's a road found at Uppleholme, a fort complex at Crawthorne near Kirby Moorside, fortified watchtowers along the coast at Findlay, Goldsborough and Whitby, and even more recently, which I found out when I went to give a talk at Aldborough, is that they've now discovered where the Forum is and the amphitheatre and the graveyard for gladiators and other people. And of course, the gladiators cemetery just on the road going north out of York. Good question is, what do they all tell us? These are just some of the little, I'm not going to spend some time on, but you can get these booklets about all these places. Deer Street at Headlam. Once they start digging up the road, they suddenly find there's a Roman road there. And this is the sort of thing that people are digging up. Little miniature ivory swords, for children. Pottery of all sorts. Now, what's interesting about these pots is not just the shapes. It's just that they come from all over the known world. And they're in Aldborough. They're here. And that's what's astonishing. And when you actually look at the gravestones of soldiers and soldiers' wives and families in the York Museum, they come from all over the empire. Knob jokes are favourites, of course, among soldiers. This one was discovered in Catterick Camp. The ideal place for a knob joke, I suppose. And it's quite interesting. Another one was found on a wall in a quarry on the borders of Scotland, and there was another one at the top of the quarry. Someone had bothered to spend like half a day chipping out a penis. Yeah. But one of the great developments, of course, was the discovery of the Londinium tablets in 2016. Another building development that got held up for 5 years. Must have cost someone millions of pounds. But this is where they discovered these tablets, these wooden tablets, with styluses. So they suddenly had like hundreds of letters. Some of them were bills and accounts, promises, and absolutely wonderful things. So there's the stylus, and there's the sort of tablets that had to be salvaged. Again, something else. Go to Ripley, and there's this road that's just been discovered uh, really Hollybank Road, Ripley and Harrogate, which you can go and see. Doesn't look much, but dig down there and you'll find the road. We're going to get onto roads in just a second. There's a Roman road at Skelton where my daughter lives. This one at Ilkley, just digging up the road. Foss Way, Menworth Hill. That's White Straight. Question for you: where are the Roman sites around here? Have you seen any strange inscriptions? And just keep your eyes open and tell Yorkshire Archaeological Society. My thesis is for why did the Roman Empire survive so long? Why was it so successful? That it created what I'm going to call an empire of belonging. Instead of excluding people and saying, you're not a proper citizen, get out. There's us and them. They just said, do you want to become a Roman? So, you conquer a country, you get the Celtic chiefs. This is what the British did in India, didn't it? There was all these Rajas and they didn't kill them all and wipe them out. They made them British citizens. And then they got their sons to come to Eton and go to Oxford and Cambridge to get it. Then they'd go back with British values. Yes, they welcomed them in rather than repress them and exclude them. And in a way, what links all these, the arteries that link this kind of mental community of belonging, were these roads. Because these roads brought not just soldiers and goods and clothes, they brought knowledge, they brought values, they brought theatre, they brought religions, they brought the sense of belonging, and people moved around these arteries of the empire, bringing fresh ideas, fresh novelties, and ways of living. They brought, above all, security. You can't have an empire without security. And all the armies. One of the reasons why it was quite easy to take over Rome was because all the armies were on the frontiers. That's where it was all happening. They brought peace, order, shared laws, the rule of law, a shared language, common identifiable currency you could use all over the empire, shared values, clothing, theatres, temples, gods, libraries, clean water, baths, central heating, living standards for all, not replicated until 19th century Europe. I did economic history for a while, and honestly, grain production did not reach the levels that they were in the Roman Empire until the 18th century, and life expectancy until the 19th century. People were living a very good life. They had Garland as well. Crisis. The loss of this multicultural empire of belonging was followed by collapse and disorder, anarchy, despotism, and barbarism. Whence the Romans left, it wasn't an immediate catastrophic decline, but over the next 100 years, we were invaded. We were invaded by Celts, Picts from Scotland, and then the Germans came, Angles and Saxons. We call ourselves Anglo-Saxons, big ourselves up. That's two German tribes. And then the Normans came. I mean, if you did any DNA tests of people in this room, we're all a multicultural rabble. And what would be a pure Brit? Well, I don't know, some kind of barbaric. I don't know. Boudicca was a Celt. So that Monty Python sketch, what did the Romans do for us? Well, aqueducts, yeah, all right. Roads, yeah, wide, canals, ports, public health, baths, footpaths, cheese, medicines, law, education, circuses, but above all, peace. But lots of other things. I just threw that in just to see if you were listening. Yes, yeah. Anyway, knowledge. Look, the Greeks gave us the knowledge that we really needed, but then the Romans formalized it. The calendar, Augustus for August, Julius for July. They gave us our calendar. They gave us our names. They gave us Latin. I mean, I know about you, but when I went to school, I had to do bloody Latin, I mean, this was uniting Britain. I've got a friend who's professor of history at Norwich, I think, at the moment, and he said to me, British civilization's collapsing because we stopped teaching Latin. And that's, that there is that, it's not completely fatuous. Basically, they brought a multicultural sense of belonging. To get theatre, music from all over that empire. Luxuries as well, sculptures, mosaics, frescoes, dyes, and great authors like Catullus, Horace, Ovid, historians like Livy, Tacitus. Most of the institutions and principles that are the foundations of civilization were from the Greeks and the Romans. Democracy, politics, law, freedoms, dignity, dignitas, civic virtues, civitas, a sense of duty, all embedded in civic cultures, institutions, and structures. What basically you see in these walls, what you see in the statues, what you see in the currency, what you see is an embodiment of something that lasts for over 1,000 years, and children were brought up into that culture, and wherever they went, they took it with them. So what did the Romans do for Yorkshire? Well, just about blooming everything. They invented footpaths, signposts, milestones, squares or forums, houses, barns, stores, town halls, clean water, drains, heating systems and houses, hospitals and amphitheatres, pottery, road signs and monuments, law courts, libraries, schools. Not everyone had them. I mean, Northallerton only got one just recently, but yeah. And language, conversations, books, pens, writing tablets, even the things that we'd call a post office, because at these way stations, every mile you could leave a letter which could go to Rome. By the way, you think of all roads lead to Rome. They might have come from Rome to here, but you could go back from here to Rome. You could walk it. People like Horace have written wonderful books about just walking roads and paths from city to city and town to town and writing about it. Then there's also villas and villages. And all together, there was an idea of civic pride that linked things together. But there was also money and banks. Where else in the world could you go and start trading with people and use a common currency? I mean, so you've got a common language, a common currency, and a common law. If you fall out with someone or have a debate, he hasn't paid me the sum he promised, you could go to a court because there was Roman law that was applied all over the empire. But also you could get the same sorts of food, you could get the same sorts of wines. You basically had the good life. The Stoics like Cicero, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius are brilliant. They promoted reason, bravery, fortitude, honesty, and dignity. And Cicero is one of my top favorite ancient philosophers. You should read him. He's wonderful. Mind you, when my son went to New Zealand, I bought him Marcus Aurelius's Meditations because that's also something worth reading. Right. I'll pick up speed now. So what were the Roman ingredients of civilization? Where all those things I've mentioned, language, currency, but also a narrative, the same gods, the same heroes. Yes, the same stories of great battles which you share, like we do today. We have Remembrance Day, which sort of belongs to us, but they had all those things like Trajan's Column, which is a complete history of a whole lot of wars, and people would go and see it, kids, and then they'd, you didn't need all this Star Wars nonsense. You had real histories of real events. Okay, so how did it all start? Well, there were these invasions. The original one was from Claudius, didn't last very long, and gradually more and more invasions pushing up into the north. Now, the army only fought almost not many people were killed in these invasions because people would go ahead and say, look, we've got people coming, traders, and then gradually they'd say, the army's coming along, but they're not coming to kill you, in fact, would you like to join the army? But basically this is how it works. And it didn't take long before most tribes had bought into it. Now you all think about Boudicca. Oh yes, the great hero of the radical right in Britain today is Boudicca, but Boudicca was an Iceni, Welsh, and her father had become a client of the Romans, and he got everybody to be Roman. But when he died, all his two sons were quite happy with this, but she didn't want it. She wanted to go back to the Iceni tribal thing. Well, I'll leave this with you, Haggy. We're retribalizing Europe right now. So, how do you create a city? You just go and look at London. There it all is, lay down. You build walls around it like York. You have a baths. Well, we've got one next to Richer Sounds, haven't we? And you create a forum in the middle, and you have temples to the gods. The fact that we've only got one god now is all down to a guy who got made emperor here, Constantine. And Constantine, every emperor was allowed to have a special religion, a special god. Constantine chose Christianity because this was a new thing and quite a lot of the new soldiers were Christians. But there wasn't any idea that it would become the only religion. I mean, they were polytheistic. And that's a good idea. I haven't got time to tell you about Edward Gibbon. But, there's multi-volume, lifetime work on the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. And one of the main, he's a Christian, by the way, but one of the main culprits for the collapse of the Roman Empire was Christianity. Why? Because in the Roman and Greek world, the public world trumped the private. Christianity trumps the private world. Look after your soul. If you want to devise an empire, you've got to be willing to fight. You've got to do your duty. You've got to go out into the empire and do what Christianity says. Get on your knees, beg for forgiveness, become humble, get rid of your ego. Killing is completely wrong. Making money is completely wrong. Fighting is completely wrong. How can you maintain an empire? And so basically, Christianity is kind of like an acid to what was the Roman. I mean, you imagine if it had hit Alexander the Great storming across Persia and someone comes along, why don't you just get on your knees? And this life isn't important. The afterlife's where it all happens. Wow. The roads of Britain then, crikey, look, 4,000 miles of roads built over about 100 years and a few added to it. They radiated out from London and from the ports. And gradually, they're like a ladder structure going up the east coast and the west coast, and with rungs going across, so people could travel north and south and east and west. Just think about the process. Process of building them, and then what happens is you've got work for hundreds of people, you've got way stations, you've got shops and baths, you've got to entertain people while they're on their voyages. So roughly, that just a quick illustration of what's going on. It's a massive, each mile of road has a massive, but these roads are still there. They're still functioning. And you needed three professions: surveyors, architects, civil engineers, and then you need workers as stonemasons. I won't go into it, but they had to be a minimum of 12 foot wide, allowable for two carriages to pass, and they were cambered, water could run off them. And they had ways of getting across boggy areas by putting logs in and then gradually lowering rocks until they could get across. And that's roughly the road system. And of course, we're the road going up to Iberacum is the A19, and the one going up to Catterick is the A1. And when you get up to, was it the A66 across from that's basically a Roman road. I stayed near that road a couple of Christmases ago, and the Roman road was 100 yards up the road. I was just up there. I said, "Oh, it's incredible." But of course, there were all these tribes, you see. And so the two tribes up here were, just think about the Parisi who came from Paris. The poor buggers had been, the Romans had got there first, so they escaped from France over here, then got collared again, and the Briganti who came from Brittany. So you've got two French tribes up here, and then the Romans come along. Oh God, what are we going to do here? So they become kind of client states, and they all worked along very well. As I said to you, in a way, we've got the terrible prospect of the re-tribalization of Britain. Every states are beginning to break down. Empires have broken down. Now the local trumps even the national. I worry about whether, France and Germany and Britain and Spain are going to survive as political entities. Of course, we've got a different little groups from all over the place taking over. We've got almost we got out and just think about what happens when the Romans we get feudalism. Yeah. Citizens disappear, they become serfs. Oh, there's no middle class, there's no equestrians anywhere. I mean, castles, lords, serfs. All the land is owned by a small number of people who then reduce everyone to servitude. And as a Roman, you could be a citizen protected by law with your rights. And you could travel anywhere without being robbed. And if you were robbed, you could get the law to come and deal with it. So when you actually watch all these TV programs about the medieval world, that's the world that we lost. That's roughly what the Roman Empire looked like. Well, looks a bit like the EU, doesn't it? And all roads lead to Rome. Never underestimate these roads, because these roads brought trade, administration, security. They brought peoples. Just go to York Museum. So people from all over the known world came to York and lived here and thrived here and brought their families here. Just a bit of Roman road. When we went to southern Italy a couple of years ago, I wanted to go to this place. It's the very end of the Apennine Way, and it's just absolutely amazing, because that's where, if you were going to sail to the east, that's where you got the boat. And I had a chill up my spine, because it was like the place where you left. That's where Virgil died. So where north of York? Well, go to Aldeburgh. That's where this famous Ninth Legion was based. Catterick Camp, the biggest military camp. But who founded that? The Romans did. It's been a military camp since they got there. And when they dig around there, they found theatres, they found masks, they found, money, all sorts of wonderful things. At Whitby, there were these towers, the A19, and lots of other roads. By the way, one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, R.G. Collingwood, and he loved the Romans, wrote several books on Roman Britain. He also did a sort of multi-volume catalogue of inscriptions, milestones, and little gravestone inscriptions. They're just absolutely wonderful. But he said of Aldeburgh that it was a town with beyond it was a district where the Romans were not a civilizing influence, altering the face of the countryside by their skill in the art of peace, but an armed force dividing and dominating a country enclosed in the meshes of forces, dividing and dominating a country included in the meshes. So what he's basically saying is Rome gave this security, but beyond the border, which eventually is Hadrian's Wall, beyond the border is like a nightmare of barbaric tribes killing each other and willing to kill you, where you would not be safe to travel. So at Aldborough, this is what you'll find. That's the road going to the north. You can actually see it's like the A1 moving to the north. They've only dug up one little area. That's a mosaic. That's part of the town site with the walls at the back there. And this is Romulus and Remus. It's a very poor mosaic. You know, they obviously didn't get the top craftsman up here, but there's Romulus and Remus underneath the she wolf. So can you imagine the north of England? And they've got this complete culture operating, and everyone's buying into it. They're going to the theatre, they can watch a gladiatorial, but they're reading Horace and all sorts of things like that, which is like amazing. They're using pottery from all over the empire. That is what they've discovered as the site of the amphitheatre. So the latest is that they've now discovered the gates to Aldborough. They found a little glass and brick factory just outside, which is being worked on at the moment. But the amazing thing is that Hadrian, Constantinius, these are all emperors, Constantine and Septimius Severus, all Roman emperors came to York. They were here. That's amazing. So at some point, this was the center of the Roman world because they were here, and they were here for a purpose, because they wanted to defend the boundary between civilization and barbarianism, the empire of belonging. By the way, this is only a guess of mine, but I feel it very strongly. All those legends, where does all these legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table come from? Well, the logical thing to me is when the Roman legions left, a lot of Romans stayed. York survives till the late 7th century because of its walls. And people were still wearing Roman clothing and still using Roman coinage. It took a long time for the de-Romanization of the North. So these, in my view, were the Knights of the Round Table. A few very heavily armed, brilliantly educated, capable warriors would take on the barbarians. In my view, all the myths of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table comes from the survivors of the legions that had left. I've got to pick up speed now. Lots of coastal signal stations. They're remarkable. Look, this is so what the Romans did. They had signal stations. So the baddies are coming down. What are we going to do? Well, they have these signal stations. Someone gets on a horse and runs it. The army was always 20 miles behind the line. So that's where the camps were. Then they'd ride back and then they'd come up and meet these people. But they were really significant places. They built these very sophisticated towers. These are just a few little things. Vindolanda, remember a few years ago, they discovered there was hundreds of these tablets, clay tablets. I mean, some of them were just like an officer's wife writing to another officer's wife saying, "Would you like to come round for dinner?" But others were, less interesting. But this is a mock-up of what these villas would look like. Underground heating systems, underfloor heating system, water supplies, Piercebridge Fort. The forts all over the country where there were garrisons. But we get finally to York, and basically it's a major capital from 211. There was originally sort of a wooden fort, and gradually it grew. Gates were developed, the baths put in, temples, which we can see today. I mentioned the tribal systems. Just go back. So this is I only came across this recently. Craythorne Roman camp, just near Kirby Moorside, and it's right on the boundary between the Parisi and the Briganti. So they obviously thought we better put a fort here because these old tribes might start doing what they've always done, raiding each other and stealing each other's sheep and stuff like that. That's worth going to. You can walk around. I haven't been myself, but that's next on the agenda. I think Sheila's going to be looking forward to it. But this is what the Roman camp, the original Roman camp, you can see the walls, that's the existing walls, what it looked like. And these are all things you know about, but, formidable buildings and altars. And of course, I love this phrase. not all Germans who came here, Saxons and Angles, um, could write, but if they could, it would be in Latin. But there is a famous manuscript that's been discovered somewhere in Germany, just a Saxon warrior writing back to his brother, and he basically said, "This land must have once been inhabited by giants." I mean, how else do you explain these walls? How else do you explain these temples? Do you know York Minster is built on the top of the columns of the old Roman Forum? Just think about that. I mean, these are monstrous built constructions that they're putting up. These massive viaducts, bridges, great port institutes. They invented a kind of a cement that would set underground, underwater, I should say. So there's all these military camps. The Roman imperial achievement was through this thing I mentioned, the cosmopolis. It's so expensive to repress people. It's much easier to get them to buy into your system. And that's what we did in Africa. That's what we did in Australia. That's what we did in every country we go to. What the Romans would do is invite you in. They would even tolerate your difference. If they attacked you, you'd go and sort them out. And that's why the Jews got sorted out. The famous destruction of the temples. But otherwise, you're in. And that worked extremely well. All this greatness was an embodiment of this idea of belonging. Diocletian made a law that every male, I should say, living within the boundaries of the Roman Empire could become a citizen if they wished. They didn't have to, but they could become a citizen. That is incredible. Doesn't matter about your class, doesn't matter about your religion, doesn't matter about your color. You can be a Roman. Now think about it today, where all around the world people are creating them and us. They're not proper Britons. They're not proper French people, and we want them out. It's them and us, an empire of division and difference rather than an empire of belonging where everyone could join. What made the British Empire so great? The second great empire, the worst, is that we followed the Roman model. And that was linked by common language, Latin, common coins, common dress, common gods, polytheistic, by the way. Once we get only one God, we're in trouble because anyone who's not a follower of your religion becomes a second-class citizen and the enemy. Why not just have every God going? What's wrong with that? To worship whoever you like. Why impose Catholicism or Protestantism or the Muslim religion or anything else? Why don't we just let people do what they want to do? It's just much easier for everyone. So we move on from that. By the way, it's just a kind of little thing, if you have repression, you all have risks, loss, damages, all sorts of costs. And if you have incorporation, lots of other things. Okay, so cosmopolitanism is basically the idea of belonging. I don't know about you, but I travel quite a lot, not as much as I'd like to, but I feel quite happy wherever I go. I can make friends and enjoy the food. If you feel happy about where you are and you can get on with people, you're a cosmopolitan. If you only like your town, your street, your city, your country, and you don't like foreigners, you're a parochial. So cosmopolitans are people who feel that they can live and get on, live and get live. Remember the common language. The Roman law, I haven't got time to tell you, but the Roman law is the basis of the UN. It's the basis of British legal system. It's still studied if you study jurisprudence. It lays down. So what happened? There were all these different laws around the country. So what the Romans did is you'd take over Gaul or Spain, and then you'd include their laws in the legal system. And then about every 100 years, you have a codification where you just sort of bring it all. That's what Gaius and the great Roman lawyers were just codifying this ever complex system. But everyone's law was in there. Provinces were set up so you could have a self-governing system. So you don't want to rule from Rome, which was impossible. So you had basically local government, a local trade going out all over the empire. The ports and the roads were significant. They carried people, but they carried the ideas and the culture and the sense of belonging. And just look at some of these things that they create. I mean, it's just unbelievable that Hadrian's Wall, Ephesus, look at these incredible places where you could imagine the culture being embedded as people watch the same plays and theatricals. I mean, this is Hadrian's library. Hadrian's library, that's what he built for people. Go along, you don't just put a monument, you build them a library. And the baths, you see, that's Bath. I mean, it's astonishing. Trajan's column with a history on it. After the Romans, basically, the world that we know falls apart. We're invaded. You've got insecurity, constant war, constant fear. People don't travel, no common currency. People are soon living a subsistence life, and then they become serfs. And you can be literally raped by the Lord. If you're a woman, probably if you're a man as well. Edward Gibbons' thesis then is that what caused all this was the growth of the private life compared with the public life. He thought it was withdrawal from politics into, what is it today? Television, film, bloody phones, social media, the withdrawal from the active life into a passive life, a sedentary life of viewers, and massive inequality where the rich, instead of going out and being the generals and running the provinces, just took to their estates and started hoarding up money, leaving everyone to get on with it. People stopped paying taxes. Of course, I'm just about finished, but St. Augustine, the famous author, of course, he blamed it all on irreligion and paganism, and he wanted us all to get back on our knees. Well, that's the last thing the Romans needed, was to get on their knees. They had to get up and fight the Huns who were coming over the borders. Other theories that it was to do with the collapse of civic spirits, bad luck, tribal identities. But I don't think it was. I think that essentially what went wrong was that people lost the will to fight. They lost the civic spirit. The leaders lacked virtue, and people gave up on the empire of belonging. Troops at the borders rebelled. All the problems were on the borders. The armies were there. And each of the leaders of the great armies decided they could be emperor, and they would then attack. And that's what happened in Britain. The 4th century, 2 leaders of the legions decided that they would take over the Roman Empire, and they moved south. They both got wiped out. But then Britain was seen as a rebellious state, and it's the first country to leave the EU. We're a rebellious lot of buggers, aren't we? And anyway, so listen, I can't finish the whole lecture, but I just want to say I'll end up with David's Death of Seneca. There was Cicero, who was put to death by Julius Caesar. I have no time for Julius Caesar. These were bad, bad people. And poor Seneca was put to death by Nero. He's basically told to slit his throat, and he couldn't do it. In the end, he got in a bath. Had the bath heated up, and everything cut, so he couldn't bleed himself to death. It took him about 13 hours to do it. Socrates was put to death. Philosophers like me, very dangerous stuff. What I'm doing to you now. I mean, I'm sure Farage will send his hitmen out. But anyway, I'll just end up with this, that we're living through really tumultuous times, and Edward Gibbons' Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire is good reading. I think you should think very carefully about whether we want an empire of belonging or we want Little Britain and what that involves. I'm worried that we're going to lose our security. Already people are talking about leaving NATO. They're talking about abandoning international treaties. This sounds to me like a very dangerous recipe. So the Romans were a wonderful people. I hope I've convinced you they're worth respecting and that you live in a city full of Romanness, and it's a wonderful city. And thank you for inviting me.
What comes across there is not just John's passion for the Romans, but what it's like to be a Roman, the philosophy of being a Roman.
Yeah.
One would almost think you were a philosopher by background. And I was thinking of did Julius Caesar ever say those famous words? Infamy, infamy, they've all got it infamy. Maybe different type of person who did that, maybe Kenneth Williams. But so I'm just going to ask for some questions now. I'm sure that you've got a lot of things that you want to ask. John's got an encyclopedic mind, so you can probably answer some of those areas. Any questions from the floor here? Yes. So,
how did people show that they wanted to be considered Romans? Or did they have ID cards?
Well, there's the presumption. The presumption was for the Romans, they'd move into an area, and the presumption was that if you started dressing Roman and you started using the currency and you started learning the language and you started going to the temples, well, you were in. There would be different places would have different processes where you became an actual citizen, but it was just a matter of you just became it. It wasn't a big event. It's not like you're going to be christened or something. You just became Roman, and it's a wonderful process of incorporation.
yes, Nick.
You seem to have located the Romans entirely as a land-based phenomenon.
Oh, right, yeah.
Surely they depended a great deal on their sea communications and for protein on fish. It was easier to buy fish in Roman York than it is to buy fish now.
Yeah, I did mention the ports, the roads leading to the ports, and the ports going out to the empire. I did have some slides, about that. You're absolutely right. By the way, there is with the growth of the green political thing, there are green historians now working on a thesis that the Roman Empire really collapsed because of the collapse of the soil in North Africa, which was the breadbasket of Europe. 90% of the corn and food that got into the Roman Empire came from, but in the end that soil was degraded. Now it's all sand, isn't it? I mean, all these places like Algeria and Morocco, they had soil, they were growing stuff. Now it's just sand. And also the climate. And fish, the areas were overfished. So that's a really interesting point. No, you're absolutely right. But there was this massive, I've forgotten the name of it, this massive fort complex that was built on the outskirts of Rome just to bring all that stuff in with a growing population.
Yes.
You were talking about multiculturalism and the way things were distributed and taken from right across the empire. But all the books you mentioned were Italian, Roman.
You mean Cicero and
Yeah.
things like that? Yes, that's a good point. Maybe because, well, I could have mentioned Polybius, who was a Greek. Yeah, that's a good point. But I wouldn't have known, you see. I mean, I can't discriminate. I mean, where did Cratylus come from? Where did Horace come from? The one thing I can say is all these people, including people in York, were Romans. They didn't come from Rome. They'd never lived in Rome. They weren't Roman citizens of the city of Rome. That's what's really interesting. You didn't have to come you didn't have to come even from Italy to be a Roman. Anyone could be a Roman. And that was one of the great things about the British Empire and still the Commonwealth. That you were part of something bigger, a sense of belonging. And what's interesting is the King, I mean, King Charles and Queen Elizabeth actually still have nurtured that idea that somehow these sort of people from Africa and little islands were actually British. Yeah.
Good. Chat. Yeah.
Two things really. One was you were talking about Marlborough, and I think it's been pontificated that they were growing wine or growing vines at Marlborough, and down the road is the Dunsford Vineyard, where they've got a mural of what they think of the artist's representation of Roman Marlborough, which is quite interesting. But the other thing is that you said right at the beginning it was a patriarchy, and then you said that people had lots of rights and could become citizens. Did
Only if
women
you were
have the
male.
same rights as the men, or did they?
No,
Were they allowed to become citizens, or were they
Obviously.
just shackles?
no, right. Mary Beard's the authority, isn't she? I mean, Mary Beard's absolutely was wonderful. But I'm in a book with Mary Beard. I've got a chapter in the same book. It's a great honour to be in a book with Mary Beard. But she's got a book called Roman Women, which you should read. And of course, it depended on your rank. If your husband was a equestrian, that gave you more status than if he was a pleb. But you know, Roman women weren't treated as shackles. They weren't beaten and exploited as they were in the Middle Ages. I mean, well, right up to the 19th century, women were probably treated worse in the 18th century in Europe than they were in sort of 3rd century Roman Empire. So they did have certain rights, but they weren't always. This one of the great things about Britain is that we have a common law system, and the Romans had a common law. I did jurisprudence for a long time, but the interesting thing is that Roman law, property law, and Roman criminal law only come about in the 4th century AD. The rest of it was common law. It was customary law. It's just custom and convention. And that's the other thing that Britain took. You didn't need great charters and constitutions written down like the French. What you do is what works, what has happened, you codify that and you make it into law. This is using history and actual practice as a way of creating a society. And so women didn't have to have laws that included them or excluded them. It was what happened in common law practice. So I can't say that every woman was being treated fairly in 3rd century empire. A lot of women were slaves, of course, but even they had better rights than they would have done if they were not living in the Roman Empire.
So work in progress and pretty good.
Work in progress, yeah.
At the time. Yeah, but time probably just for probably one more question, probably from Stuart here.
Really interesting to hear about Aldeburgh, and they know where the amphitheatre was. What's sitting on the amphitheatre in York?
I don't know. Where is the amphitheatre? Where is it?
Well, I hear the amphitheatre is near the Mount School.
Is it really?
That's what I've heard over the years. I mean, it's only people who said it to me as if it was knowledge. I'm not read it anywhere. But I thought you might astound us by saying, if you go up to the Mount School, there's a pillar sticking out, but no.
No, I really don't know, but I'd be interested. You whetted my appetite.
Something yesterday that suggested that it was under King's Banner and gave reasons why it might be under King's Banner, but that nobody has actually found the they think there should be one here, but perhaps it was a Dorbury, not at all.
It's under KFC, is it?
KFC. So, just give me 30 seconds.
Yeah.
By the way, a couple of years ago, Sheila and I went to Sicily. You got to go to Sicily. Anyway, we went to this place called Casala Villa Romana. You should go. It's just stunning. This was built for Marcus Aurelius as a summer place. And Sicily is between Africa and Rome. So what happens is they would bring all the animals that were going to be used at contests and things. They'd bring the African slaves there and sort of civilize them and get the animals sorted. And then all over there, they've got these astonishing murals. I'll just show you this one. And it's the whole history of what was going on. And the murals are the most fantastic quality. It's so moving. And then there's all this, the Valley of the Temples in the south of Sicily. There's about 6 of these sort of temple sites with sort of Greek and Roman temples. It's absolutely astonishing. All you have to do and go to Italy is dig, and you find Roman civilization.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, it's been a great evening, and I've certainly learned a lot about the extent of the Roman influence. And it's going to give me great pleasure now to ask Professor Jim Drive to give us a spontaneous thanks for this wonderful lecture.
John, shall I stand here?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, you've been sitting in the
Have a
throne,
lectern.
you deserve that now.
Do you want the lectern?
Like a rope then.
You take the lectern.
No, I have to say I was really looking forward to this, John. I certainly wasn't just disappointed. What a tour de force. I was looking forward to, and I speak as an equestrian, brought up beyond the Hadrian's Wall, and therefore in the land of the barbarians. But I learned Latin at school, as you did, and as you did, and it stays with you. I still cringe to this day, many, many years after the Latin hires, when I hear somebody say there is no data on this subject. And it just ignore everything else that they've got to say. But really, and the thing is, you sort of take the Roman Empire for granted, don't you? You hear about it, you know all about the fact that it was different. And all these new things, I've only recently realized there was a road from Ilkley to Aldeburgh, so I was intrigued. And you have, and I also was a little bit prejudiced against the Roman Empire because I've just started writing the history of York Medical Society, and in one of the early meetings, someone talks about the value of bloodletting, and that was Galen in the 2nd century AD, and they were still following the Roman recipe when King George III was treated. Mad King George, and when the York Medical Society was, so I was a bit irritated by the fact that we hadn't broken away. But you've reignited. I think that what I've written here is the new ideas, things that I'd never thought of, like why did the Roman Empire fall? It was all down to Christianity. And who was King Arthur? He was the Roman remains of the last Roman. But what really came across, I think, is you've reignited the sense of wonder that we should all feel. It was the passion, the amazement, and you things you've taken for granted for a long time. You reignite the whole panoply, the common language. But the thing that I think will live with us is the relevance to the present day. And the fact that the Roman Empire existed because of coexistence. And we are in the process. It's particularly sad as you drive around West Yorkshire and find streets festooned with the flag of King George, of St. George, which has a particular meaning this year, and a regrettable one. So I think you've given us a great deal to think about. I can't read all my You'll be glad to know I can't read my spontaneous remarks. Appearing at the through line. But really, it's been great, and thank you so much on behalf of ourselves.